Hey, it's Jess, and welcome to Becoming Heartstrong. I'm a social entrepreneur, speaker, mother, and business owner, and I'm here because I believe in you, and I want you to live your full potential. My mission with this podcast is simple: to offer you perspectives, tools, and inspiration to help you live with more courage, rebuild after setbacks, and strengthen yourself from the inside out. So each week, I talk to thought leaders, authors, experts, and everyday amazing people who share their stories and outlooks that help you get from where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow. Let's get started. Do you ever feel like you have something great inside of you, but you just aren't sure how to bring it to life? Do you ever need some clarity on how to get from where you are to where you want to be? I'm so excited to share a free guide I created just for you. This tool has helped me in my own times of struggle and doubt. It's called Your Future Self Guide. This mini course includes a future self visualization I recorded, a series of journal questions, and some insights from me about overcoming self-doubt and embracing self-leadership. You can download it for free at jessicalindberg.com/futureself. That's jessicalindberg.com/futureself. Let's get back to the show. Welcome to Becoming Heartstrong. My guest today is Nicole Runyon. She is a psychotherapist, parent coach, keynote speaker, and renowned for her expertise in child and adolescent mental health. She's got 21 years of experience, so she's got a lot to say, and she has extensive knowledge of technology's impact on mental health, child development, and intergenerational parenting, which I want to ask her about. She's on a mission to solve the mental health crisis of the iGeneration, and I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I think I have like a bazillion questions for you. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I looked over your website before and I was like, these are all the things that we're all struggling with as parents. So I'd love to begin with, how did you get where you are today? Like, what were you noticing in your practice that you're like, ooh, something's got to be done here?
Yeah. So I, about 10 years ago, started to see a trend. And the trend was kids coming into my office with pretty extreme mental health issues with no root in any psychosocial issue. The families were intact. There was no trauma. There was, pretty typical, maybe some typical childhood angst. It wasn't to say the parents weren't perfect. There were family dynamic issues or things that could be worked on, but nothing to warrant the extreme psychological symptoms and issues that I was seeing. And so I kind of asked myself, what is happening with these kids?
Mm-hmm.
And in my training, I was always trained to see a person in the context of their environment. So for a kid, it's your family, your parents, your school, your friends. And so what I could pinpoint at the time that was different for these kids than for any other kids previously was technology and their exposure to it, and just how more and more of their lives were being revolved around it. And so I just started to speak about it. And then I realized sort of over the course of a couple of more years that, the technology is absolutely affecting them and that's a part of it, but it's really actually a symptom of even a more kind of macro issue. And I started to really look at the culture, the overall culture and the culture of parenting. And what I realized was that parents were really struggling, to give their kids basic life skills. And so a lot of the kids that I would see, they would start with me in middle school or high school, and then they would sort of continue on with me into the college years, and they weren't launching very well. They weren't like okay being away from their parents. So that's when I started to kind of combine the parenting with the technology as an explanation for why they were struggling so much. And essentially what I realized is that they're not going through child development the way that they need to. So they're missing things along the way, and then they're not ready for the world. And so because of that, they're developing all these symptoms. Anxiety, right? Anxiety is so huge right now. And anxiety is really just a lack of feeling any control and feeling a control over yourself or self-trust. And really that's because kids aren't getting that foundational, development around doing hard things, working through it, building their confidence and trusting themselves to deal with whatever comes up.
So when you were, I'm curious, like, was this during COVID that you were seeing this? Do you think I mean, when you were starting to notice this, I'm just wondering like timeline because I felt like in my own house that was such a challenging time. Did that have anything to do with what you think you were witnessing, or is it a bigger issue?
Oh, well, that's a really good point because yes, absolutely. I think it was definitely there before COVID, but COVID definitely magnified whatever problem was there. It
Mhm.
just sped it up and made it kind of go faster. So yes, I think it became really clear to me during that time because kids were in a lot of ways it was awful. Like it was awful
Mhm.
for kids,
It
right?
was.
Like they didn't get what they needed.
Mhm.
Um, because actually life got easier for them.
Mm.
And, they were many of them were doing school in their beds with their cameras off and not
Mm.
really doing what they needed to do. And, I think the poor teachers, right? They had no idea how to teach on Zoom. And so, things just got all kind of miscombobulated and nobody was really getting what they needed.
They
And so the
needed.
kids kind of got let off the hook.
Hmm.
And that's when I saw this issue in them that they don't know how to do anything hard.
Wow. So I want to ask you back up just one second. You said people were coming with like these symptoms, but you didn't really see a basis for them. So what symptoms were you seeing? So we can just to give because maybe somebody who's listening is like, my kid has these symptoms or I've observed these. Like, what were you seeing that was just felt so extreme in that you were witnessing in the kids that you saw?
A lot of anxiety,
Mhm.
to the point to where it got to be panic disorder,
Mm.
social anxiety to the point that a lot of kids were school avoidant. They couldn't even go to
Oh,
school.
wow.
And anxiety then that manifested in a lot of OCD I was seeing.
Mhm.
And then the depression. So there's a lot of self harm, suicide attempts, and just, all full on depression to where, again, no explanation in it.
Mhm.
And those were, kind of the big red flags for me, right?
Mhm.
Like you would expect to see some depression and anxiety throughout childhood, especially if
Sure.
you have a little bit of whatever, you have some friend issues, maybe you're being
Mhm.
bullied, maybe your parents got divorced. Like I would expect there to be
Mhm.
some adjustment issues. But I was seeing such extremes.
Hmm. And so you attributed those to not just it's because I think a lot of times you see that and then it's like, well, let's medicate or but you're saying that it was deeper. And so it was around a lot of parenting. And one of the things that you used in your bio that I thought was interesting was intergenerational variations in parenting. And so I'm curious what that is and how that idea is impacting what you were seeing.
Sure. It's really the pendulum swing
Okay.
of, you were raised over here, right?
Hmm.
You didn't like that very much because maybe that was extreme. And
Okay.
then the pendulum swings so far over here in the other
Mm.
direction. And then that's an extreme. And each generation does it, right?
Sure.
So if we go back to the boomers, they
Mhm.
were raised to be seen and not heard, right? They had a lot of like resiliency about them. They were the
Mhm.
generation that went through the World War II, and some of them even the Great Depression. And so they really like were raising their kids from that mindset of,
Mhm.
you rely on yourself, you're resilient, you're strong,
Mhm.
and we don't care about your feelings,
Mm.
essentially.
Okay.
Right. And so those parents raised Gen X, and Gen
Mhm.
X is considered the forgotten about generation, right?
Hmm.
The latchkey generation, like, go outside, figure it out, don't come home until the
Mhm.
street lights come on, right?
Mhm.
And it's that same idea of, so that's all good, right? I have no issues with that. In fact, I advocate for that kind of parenting and giving kids independence. Where the boomers, the greatest generation, and the boomers went wrong was that they didn't pay attention to feelings, and they didn't pay
Mm.
attention to some of that, kind of more middle ground of what kids need, right? Kids need you to love and support them
Mhm.
and help them through stuff emotionally. They also need you to have really firm, strong boundaries. And then that
Mhm.
scaffolds their growth and
Security.
development. That's right.
Yeah. So then what
And
happened?
so what happened was, I think, now, people always say, well, where's the research to back up your claims?
Mhm.
Well, this is from my personal experience and my ability to analyze
Mhm.
things. The boomers not only raised Gen X, but they also raised the millennials.
Mm.
And the parenting changed, right, with the millennials. We all, were so surprised when they came into the workforce. They were entitled, they were narcissistic. Everyone was like, who are these people? Where did they come from? And they were raised by the same people,
Mhm.
essentially, the same cohort. Well, for the millennials, they had more technology than Gen X,
Hmm.
the older millennials. So, millennials considered like early 80s, but I would actually say not much changed in the parenting until the later 80s.
Okay.
And so the tech made them look not as capable. Right? I
Hmm.
mean, you think about it, they had that AOL Instant Messenger. And
Mhm.
so that's how they socialized, certainly more that way than Gen X or any generation previous, right? So they started to kind of like develop in this way of they weren't getting the kind of skills that they needed. And their parents didn't know really what hit them because this stuff came on the scene. It was normal. Everybody was doing it. Nobody really knew the effects of it. So their
Mhm.
parents saw that they were looking a little bit less capable and they responded by helping them, by
Mm.
making them feel comfortable. And suddenly, then you have in the like mid to late 90s, everybody gets a trophy, right?
Mm.
Because we don't want anyone to feel
The
bad. We don't want,
participation awards, right?
that's right. That's right. And so again, right, the pendulum here, pendulum
Mhm.
too far over here. Now, perfectly okay and necessary to care about their feelings. Nothing wrong
Sure.
with that. But you can't prevent them from having rough, difficult feelings. So
Mhm.
you can say, yeah, I'm sorry, that really sucks. You didn't get a trophy this time. You didn't win.
Mhm.
And then leave it at that.
Mhm.
And don't give them the trophy just because it makes them feel upset that they didn't get one. But see, this is what happened. And now we're doubling down. Gen X, again, forgotten about, ignored, pendulum swung over here with their Gen Z kids with more of this. We don't want them to experience pain.
Hmm. Is that because the Gen X parents didn't know how to deal with their own emotions?
Yes.
So instead of learning to deal with them and addressing them in their kids, they're sort of just sweeping them under the rug and letting the phone, sort of the scrolling, sort of take care of the like ameliorate the emotions. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because now here we are with this modality that we have to avoid our feelings, right? And to
Mhm.
feel good and to get that dopamine fix. And
Mhm.
everybody's doing it. It's not just the kids. The
Right.
parents are checking out too because life is hard and life is stressful. And at the end of the day, they don't know how to connect because they can't access their own feelings. So then they
Hmm.
can't access their kids. And it's
Wow.
too painful, right, to like not
Mhm.
have managed your own feelings to
Mhm.
then go and try to manage your kids and be okay with their discomfort.
Mhm. Are you familiar with Jonathan Haidt and his book, The Anxious Generation? I haven't read it yet, but I was thinking about that when I was researching and kind of thinking about this podcast. And so, I mean, there's so much that you just said, but it's like, I want to kind of like, what do we do about this? I'm just like, so it seems like the first thing I wanted to talk about was like the technology and the phones, because I think that's part of it. It sounds like the personal development of parents potentially is part of the issue and the way that we're parenting our kids. Would you say those are like two of the big buckets?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep. I
So
think, yeah.
you talk about the iGeneration. Is that meaning like the iPhone generation? Is that how you're characterizing it?
Well, it's actually considered the internet
Oh,
generation.
internet. Okay. Okay.
And it's two cohorts. It's Gen Z, which is 1997 to 2012.
Okay.
So right now they're between the ages of 26 and 12.
Okay.
And then it's Alpha, which is 2013 to the present. And
Okay.
they're all considered the internet generation.
Okay. Okay. I have kids in all of those. I was
Mhm.
interesting. I was doing like a little research, and I found some research from Pew that said 72% of U.S. teens say they often or sometimes feel peaceful when they don't have their phones. And
Mhm.
44% said they felt anxious without their phones. And then 4 in 10 parents say that there's like regular arguing around phones. And so, what do we do about the phones? Like, how do we manage them? Like, what is your recommendation? Because, well, I'll just tell you, I struggle with it. I'll be super transparent. So my now 12-year-old, I think he got a phone too young, but it was in the middle of COVID and he played on a club basketball team and I was dropping him off at a place I wasn't allowed to go in.
Mhm.
I, I didn't know, like, if he needed a ride. I mean, it was just this whole thing. And so there was no communication. My only way to communicate was to have my young child. And, and that I sometimes feel like was a mistake, to be honest. And so it's like I make my kids turn their phones in at night in the kitchen on the charger. Like they can't, they're not supposed to. But that's a fight sometimes, especially even with my older one. And so, what do we do and how do we solve this crisis? I mean, I know that's part of your mission. So it's like, what are some things that you could recommend to listeners about what they can do or what they might think about?
Yeah. So that's a multi-part answer.
Sure.
And the first part of it is, to your point, you want to delay as much as possible.
Hmm.
Now, w- so I have a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old. When my 15-year-old was at that age that you're describing, where you're dropping them off somewhere, you wanted the ability to stay in touch with them. There's no more payphones like there were when we were
Hmm.
kids, right? So at the time, like I would say even 5 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of these sort of newer devices on the scene. Like now we have watch it. We have the Gab watch or the
Hmm.
Gab phone, or Gizmo also makes a watch. These are safe technology devices that you can give to your kids that don't have internet, they don't have apps. Many of them just have talk and text. I think the Gab phone just added music. And so, there's Pinwheel as well. There's definitely now these companies that are coming out with this safe tech. I would highly recommend that for your middle childhood
Hmm.
child. Like,
Hmm.
anywhere from 9 to I would say 14
Hmm.
is when you can look at those safe tech devices, because we want to be able to send them out in the world, give them
Yep.
independence, let them, kind of do their own thing. But we
Hmm.
also do like logistically need to stay in touch with them, right? I
Right.
mean, my daughter, she's 10 now. Last year, she was at a choir camp in the summer, and they had one time she was auditioning for a solo. So they had one time for dismissal for everybody else and one time for dismissal for the people auditioning. Well, it come to find out they let the audition kids go an hour early.
Oh,
And at the
wow.
time, she didn't have a phone. We hadn't like looked into a watch yet because I don't know, we just didn't have a need for it. And she literally waited there for an hour because she had no way
Mm.
of contacting me. Now, I look at that and I think, well, couldn't one of the teachers like seeing that she was waiting for me and call me?
Mhm. Right.
But
That would be
whatever.
logical.
That would be logical. But the point is then it became a thing like, okay, I think she needs a watch. So we ended up with the
Mhm.
Gap watch. And so that's really great for kids like in that middle childhood range. Now, if you did give your kid something early because you didn't know about those devices, then that's when you can start looking at, okay, what are the problems and what can you do about it? Is the
Mhm.
problem that they're on it too much? Okay, if they're on it too much, maybe take off the apps or shut down the internet. Some kids, it's such a problem that they literally need you to take it away and give them a safe device.
Mhm.
And when I say take it away, a lot of people really come at me for this one because
Mhm.
they're like, well, that's a punishment and
Mhm.
whatever. And it's like, well, no, I mean, it's like if your kid was drinking a beer and they were having a problem,
Mhm.
not just having one, right? You wouldn't keep giving them beer, right? Like your job is to protect them and keep them safe. And so if you have to do something that's really hard or harsh,
Mhm.
then that's actually you're helping them. You're not punishing them. So I highly recommend that. Even with the older kids, if you have a high schooler who they are just super addicted and it's becoming a real problem, or social media is an issue, it's causing
Mhm.
mental health issues.
Mhm.
It's perfectly okay to take it away. Now, when I say take it away, I don't mean just take it away and leave it at that and let them, be alone and isolated. In that time, in that space, you really want to be connecting with them
Mhm.
because it really is a modality for being disconnected.
The phones.
the phones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about that disconnection, because you talked earlier about the disconnection from feelings. I'd love for you to say a little bit more about that, and maybe if there's any research around that, and then the disconnection from each other. I
Mhm.
think that's a really important thing that like sometimes I haven't even thought about.
Mhm. So there is research by Jean Twang, who discovered that there is a correlation, not technically causation. Now, I
Mhm.
think that we could eventually there will be research done that shows causation, but right
Sure.
now we don't have it. Her findings were that there's correlation with social media use and depression and suicidal outcomes.
Wow.
And the mediating factor in that is the avoidance of feelings. So, what's happening to these kids is they're getting this huge dopamine fix from the devices, whatever they're doing, whether it's social media or gaming or, whatever,
YouTube shorts.
YouTube shorts. Yes. And in that, they're avoiding just normal childhood stuff, right? Like
Mm,
childhood angst, childhood anxiety, depressive feelings that if they were to just be able to go through that naturally with support, of course, from
sure.
trusted adults, they wouldn't need that high dopamine, right?
Mm,
And so the avoidance is causing them to not be able to manage like just day-to-day life.
hmm.
Right. I mean, at one point I had a teenager whose parents called me up like an emergency crisis and saying, I only asked her to set the table and she threatened to kill herself.
Oh my goodness.
And she was
Wow.
serious, right? It wasn't like just a, flippant comment that was designed to make her parents mad. She was serious. Because she actually she attempted like the next day. So essentially, she couldn't even manage setting the table because she couldn't tolerate any kind of feelings of doing something she didn't want to do. So that's why there's all this
Wow.
depression and suicide, because that is their only answer. When I don't want to do something or when something's really hard, I'll just die and I don't have to deal with it. It's that extreme.
That's terrifying. Oh,
It is.
and like, how do we help them? I mean, it sounds like a resiliency issue. It sounds like a they're not able to be resilient, which is something that I think about a lot. I mean, we've had a lot of challenges in our family, and my boys have been exposed to a lot of things that kids their age have not, and I am actually thankful for that sometimes, because they have witnessed resilience like in their family, and it's something that we talk with them a lot about, like how do we help kids to be resilient?
Yeah. And that's the combination of being really cautious about how much tech we allow them to use in their childhoods and allowing them the discomfort
Of
in their
feeling.
childhoods in our parenting,
Mm,
and not just their feelings but also like just development, right? So I
okay.
talk a lot about, for example, a 3-year-old needing to learn how to tie their shoes.
Mhm.
So the bones in your hands aren't fully developed, fused together, I'm sorry, until you're 6. But
Hmm.
social emotionally, around 3 and 4, you need the frustrating task of learning how to do those things independently, like tie shoes, zip up coats, button, your
Mhm.
shirt, uh, because it's going to be frustrating because your hands are going to have a hard time doing it. But
Mhm.
your emotional development needs the frustrating task to work through it, to get to the other side and say, I'm autonomous and independent, and I'm
Mm.
ready to leave my parents and go to preschool. That's how you reduce separation anxiety.
Is you help the child to be autonomous and to feel like they have agency in something that they're doing.
Yes.
So responsibilities.
Exactly. Now that's hard on a parent, right?
Mhm.
Because your kid is going to really suffer through that
Mhm.
developmental task, right?
Mhm.
Like I remember my kids. I mean, my son, my oldest, was so resistant to tying his shoes that I
Mhm.
had to make a deal with him and say, okay, if you tie your shoes, then you can get Velcro shoes. Like, you don't have to have tie shoes. But I it's important to me that you learn how to tie your shoes.
Mhm.
So do you know what he did? He asked my dad, who he knows says yes to everything, grandpa,
Mhm.
to buy him Velcro shoes before he completed the task of tying his shoes behind
Pretty
my back.
smart. It's pretty
Very
smart. You have to
smart.
give him credit.
Very smart. To
Yeah.
this day, he's one where he gets what he wants. But and what did I do? I made him, we marched right back to the store, returned the shoes, and I said, "You're gonna tie your shoes, and that's it. Like, you're just not gonna avoid this difficulty." And that's what we need to do for our kids today. Where for you and me, like, that was just natural, right?
It's
Parents just
natural.
naturally let
Yeah.
us do those things. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's this nuance. You just said you marched your kid back to the store and you made him return the shoes. I I don't want to make a generalization, but I don't think many parents would do that today. And I think parents, they almost want to befriend their kid too. And I think that's problematic. But how do we help parents be the parents who make the kids return the shoes to the store? Like, because it's not, as much as we say our kids have all these problems, I mean, we're also responsible for some of them in the way that, how do we shift that in parents?
So the parents, I think, need a lot of support today, right? I mean,
It's hard to be a parent today.
it's so hard
It's
to be a
so
parent today.
hard.
Yes.
Mhm.
And and I think a lot of that is because we're missing community.
Mm.
For years, right? Us moms have been pitted against each other from day
Mhm.
one. Like, are you going to give birth naturally? Are you going to get the pain
Mhm.
meds? Are you going to cloth diaper or
Mhm.
disposable diaper? Do you
Mhm.
breastfeed? Do you formula feed? So from day one, it's this whole, like, this conflict. There's no sense of connection or community anymore. And so we're
Mhm.
isolated. We're all isolated in the hard. And so
Mhm.
one of the things that we can do is uh, create support systems for each other as
Mhm.
parents, and sort of get together and talk about these challenges. And you know I think a lot of parents, for example, if you look at, like, the technology use, nobody likes their kids being on devices all day, right?
No.
Nobody wants that. I don't think there's any parent that's like, yeah, here's the phone. Please be
Mhm.
on it 24/7. Don't talk to
Right.
me. Don't talk to your siblings. Get depressed, right?
Mhm.
So if we all got together and said, oh, yeah, like, my kid's struggling with this and my kid's struggling with that, and we were honest with each other and gave each other support, we could all sort of make decisions
Mhm.
together. Like, your kids' friends have limits on their phones just like your kid does, and so there's this kind of camaraderie and connection. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. The other thing I think parents really need is this messaging that, like, it's okay for your kid to be uncomfortable. Not
Mhm.
only is it okay, but it's actually necessary, and you're
Mhm.
you're actually helping them.
Mhm.
Right? Like, I think we really struggle with that idea that we're harming them or hurting them. And so that will make our discomfort easier.
Mhm.
If your kid is mad at you, like, my 10-year-old daughter likes to joke and say, well, mom, I only love you when you're saying yes. And so if they're mad at you because you said no, you're doing your job. Like,
Yeah.
that's being a good parent. And so then, yeah, that doesn't feel good. Like,
Mm-mm.
you don't want to be that person, like, but you have to be that person.
You have to be
So
that person.
managing your own discomfort, whether it is you need your own therapist or, a supportive friend or your spouse, absolutely should be on the same page. But just managing your own discomfort so you can allow that for them.
And then how would you, one of the things I struggle with is if I say, okay, it's time to put your phone down and I get, pushback from that, I don't, and then I say, okay, now we're gonna, I need your help with the dishes and we gotta do some laundry and we gotta, we have to do, mom and dad have to go to work. You guys need to do some of these things. I don't want them to see it as a punishment, but I want them to see it as like, I'm telling you this because it's the best thing for your brain and your body. Like I try to tell them, like, I'm trying to help you manage. You have to learn how to manage this technology. You're going to have it for your whole life. How do we, like, when we take it away, what's the best way to say, I don't know, do you see what I'm saying? It's like, not, you're not punished. You're not like, we're learning management skills. How can we help them? Because the reality is they're going to have it. They do have it. How do we help them? I mean, obviously age appropriately so, to manage the fact that they have this technology in their life.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that you've explained all the reasons why chores are,
Mhm,
necessary and good for you and good for
mhm,
the family, right? Like I always tell
mhm,
my kids, like, we do this together because we're a family and we all live
mhm,
here and, we all sort of pitch in and take care of each
mhm,
other. If you've done all that, like I would recommend that. That's
mhm,
important. And they still don't want to do it, or they're still upset, or they feel like it's a punishment. That's where the parent has to just be
just
uncomfortable.
to say,
Yep.
sorry, that's what you got to do.
Sorry. That's right. Yep. Like we just moved and we have a lot more yard to maintain, and we've had some rain and storms. And so all the branches from the trees are like all over. And we gave our 10-year-old the job of picking up the sticks. Well,
Mhm,
the other day she didn't want to pick up the sticks and she avoided it all day. And at the end of the day, I said, listen, even though you don't want to pick up the sticks doesn't mean you don't have to pick up the sticks.
mhm,
Right? And it wasn't fun, like, we were having a nice moment, and we were just chilling out together, and
mhm,
but it was getting later, and she needed to do it, and I
mhm,
didn't want to have to be that person, but
mhm.
I knew it was important for her to have like, see that responsibility through.
And to do it, and to not let her off the hook about it.
That's right.
I'm wondering, you've talked a little bit about independence and how it's important for our kids to have independence. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, I want to talk about sports, because they're such a big part of the world today. I mean, so many people, they play so many sports. They're traveling around for sports. I mean, it's a little out of hand, but I have kids that do it. So I'm, in that as well. And I guess I think that they help build resilience, and they help to build, but it depends on how we approach them, right? Um, so talk to us a little bit about that. Parents who have kids in sports, like, how do we help that? Because I think it is a tool to cultivate resilience and responsibility. And I mean, like, there's sometimes my son's like, I don't want to go to basketball practice. I don't feel like it. Like, he wants to stay home and probably game with his friends. And I was like, no. I'm like, you're going, it's like, we've committed to this. Your family's paid for you to go. You're out the door. Um, like, how do we use it as a tool is basically what I'm asking you.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so glad you brought this up because, um, yes, 100%. Sports are awesome for so many reasons. That, the commitment, the
Mhm,
camaraderie of a team, the being there for each other, that working through hard things,
mhm,
the if I want to win or if I want to be good, I have to put the work in,
mhm,
right? All of that, wonderful. I agree. I think it's gotten to be too much
mhm,
because what it's done is it's put the burden on the parents, right?
hmm,
Not only is it massively expensive,
mhm.
but it's also very time consuming.
It is.
And what I've noticed is like they want you to volunteer too. Like so you don't
Mm,
just have to work your butt off to pay for the sport. You don't just have to get them to and from, and 9 times out of 10, it's nowhere close to your house, right? But
mm,
now you have to also volunteer. And
mhm,
so, in no way am I saying that parents shouldn't be involved at all, but kids need the independence of childhood without their parents and
hmm,
without organized activities by adults, right? They need
hmm,
experiences away from adults. So they actually can make mistakes and get into trouble and fail a little bit and learn from that. That also creates resiliency. So if you have a kid that's like really overscheduled with that adult um, led organized activity, then they're missing some of that skill too.
hmm.
And what I notice with teenagers is that it prevents them from actually like getting a summer job or even getting like a part-time job during the school year, which I think all teenagers should have.
Mhm,
Even just a little bit. They don't have to
mhm,
like work full time or anything because if it's sport's really important to them, that's great. But to just be able to have more in their lives and kind of be more well-rounded,
mhm.
I
That's
think
not
is
dependent on the adult creating the experience. So they can think of something on their own to do. They can get creative. It's like being
yes.
bored. It's important to be bored. That's why I tell my kids, like, if you're bored, great. Think of something to do. It's like, I don't know, come up with an idea, learn something. I've noticed too with like the adult self-directedness, especially my 12-year-old. And I've read, and I don't know if this is true, that COVID created a lot of that too, because we were sitting at the kitchen table doing school with our kids and they're able to be like, Mom, is this right? Did I do it right? Did I do it right? And I notice he asks me to review his homework. He wants my stamp of approval that he's done it right. And I do spend time doing homework with my kids. I think it's important to spend that time with them, but it's also like he's got to be confident in his answers, and I can't check them all the time. Like, is that a thing, or is that just in my house?
No, that's definitely a thing. Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, it's not that parents can't help or provide that support, but
Mhm.
like if you overdo it or they're always dependent on you, it prevents them from again making their own mistakes.
Right.
Right? Like homework is that's practice.
Mhm.
And it's good for them to do it wrong because
Mhm.
then that's how they learn. And then the teacher can check it and say, "Oh, yeah, this is where you went wrong." And so they can learn from that. But if the parent's sitting there making sure there's no mistakes and they do everything
Mhm.
right, then when are they ever going to
Or
learn?
yeah. Hey there, it's Jess, and we're taking a brief pause to highlight this show's sponsor, the Heartstrong Collective. It's more than just a nonprofit, it's a social movement I founded to inspire people worldwide to embody resilience and grow through challenges. Through the Heartstrong Collective, we're dedicated to empowering caregiving families, investing in the next generation, and leaving the world just a little bit better than we found it. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com.
Yeah.
So let's talk about like independence in terms of age appropriateness, because I think that sounds like a big key to helping kids having their own things to do, um be having independent, like how do you, if someone's listening and they have, younger toddler, early school age, I guess, then maybe like middle school age, and then kids getting into high school, like how should we as parents be offering our kids opportunities for independence?
Yes. So there's three major developmental growth spurts around independence, and they're at 2, at 9, and 16.
Okay.
And so at 2, this is where, people say, "Oh, it's the terrible twos," right?
Mhm.
They start saying no and they start digging their heels in and sort of getting stubborn. This is actually exactly where they need to be because this
Mm,
is the first time they're saying, "I'm individuating. I'm
hmm,
my own person and I don't want to put my shoes on." Right?
mhm,
And so that doesn't mean they don't have to, right? But it means that parents need to understand that they're asking you for a little bit of independence and individuation. So wherever you can put that in, right? No, you
mhm,
cannot run in the street because you'll get hit
mhm,
by a car. That's my boundary. And you need
mhm,
to respect my boundary for your safety.
mhm,
But I hear you. You're looking for some independence. Let's work on putting your shoes on yourself.
mhm,
Right? It's going to be hard for you. You might not be able to do it, but we're going to let you do it yourself.
mhm,
Okay. So that's at 2. At 9 is a consciousness around seeing themselves as an individual outside of their family.
hmm,
Prior to 9, the family or whoever is your caregiver is the center
mhm,
of your universe.
mhm,
After that, friends become more important. They start wanting to please teachers. If they have a coach, they want to work hard and please their coach. And so this is another time when parents can really foster that. Now, that comes with a lot of anxiety. So a lot of times parents will come to me and say, "Oh my gosh, my kid was so mild-mannered and sweet, and all of a sudden there's all these emotional outbursts." That's actually very normal at this
hmm,
time because it's a little scary to sort of start seeing yourself as somebody in the outside world. So
mhm,
they need a lot of support and that it's okay to feel this way and it's also okay to be independent.
mhm,
This is where I suggest kids get a little bit more freedom if you live in a neighborhood that's safe enough to let them kind of
mhm,
go off and go to a friend's house, knock on the door. Can Johnny play? That's a really good
mhm,
time to be able to do that. And then 16, of course, is the driver's license, right?
mhm.
And I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a lot of kids not getting their driver's licenses.
Yes.
Um, for a lot of it, it's because parents are scared and don't trust them.
Mm. Wow.
And then it makes the kids scared. And so
Mm.
then everybody's got anxiety about driving. And then you have kids who are becoming young adults and just not driving.
Are parents saying that to their kids? Like, are they saying, I don't want you to drive because I'm afraid?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
or, I don't want you to drive because you're not ready, or I don't see responsibility in you.
Mm.
And that's part of a bigger problem. Like, if your kid doesn't look mature enough and ready enough to drive, that's because they didn't get that individuation enough throughout their childhood and that confidence building. Um, and so, yeah, you wanna definitely be careful and cautious if your kid isn't mature enough, but you
Mhm.
wanna definitely get them ready, because your messaging to them when you say you can't,
Mhm.
or you're not ready is, "I don't trust you."
Mm.
And this is the last time in their childhood when they're individuating. And so
Wow.
they need to be trusting themselves here, because if
Wow.
they can't trust themselves, they're going to become young adults that can't make decisions, that just struggle in general. And we're seeing that with Gen Z right now.
Wow. So that's such an important time
It
to be
is.
helping them. And, let's talk about fear of the world around us for a second, because I think that, and I'm wondering how that fits in. I mean, the world's always been a crazy place, right? I mean, I think every generation feels like, oh gosh, it's, going to hell in a handbasket, if you can remember your grandmother saying that. But I also think people do drive crazy. I mean, on the highway, even my husband, who's like a pretty swift driver, he's like, oh my gosh, it's like, it's scary.
Mhm.
Or the world does feel upside down. I mean, it does feel like a scary place. And it's like, how do we, like my dad used to say when we were younger, he's like, I trust you, I just don't trust everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of true. Like if we're trusting our kids and we feel like I feel like my 15-year-old's a really good kid. Like I trust him. I think he's got a great head on his shoulders. The world petrifies me. How do we manage that?
Yeah. I love that, because that's a microcosm for everything. If
Mm.
you can trust yourself and you can control yourself and do your part,
Mhm.
you can't control anybody else or anything else.
Mhm.
So you do your part, and then you can manage whatever chaos
Happens.
ensues, right? And that's one part of it. The other part of it is, you talked about being dangerous and people
Mhm.
aren't, safe on the road. So the way I like to think about it, because I have a 15-year-old too,
Mhm.
is it's more dangerous for him to be protected by me and not grow up
Mm.
than it is to send him out in the world.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I think do you know who Jordan Peterson is?
Mhm.
I think he said something once that it's like one of the most brave things that a woman does is launch her child into the world, that
Yes.
she allows them to leave the nest, that is, you know, I mean, we love our kids so much. Like, I think they're not, until they have their own kids, it's hard for them to realize this. And it's like part of loving them is pushing them to be the person that they have been created to be. And that's such a good reminder of that.
That's right. I often think of that, because I think what you're talking about is, he compares it to Mary and the statue of the Pietà,
Okay.
where,
Yes.
Jesus is dead in her arms
Mm-hmm.
and she's made the ultimate sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think it's so beautiful how he explains it, because he says that she had to give him up
Mm-hmm.
because it was more dangerous for him to stay with her.
Stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that is, and so maybe the message to mothers is that we can do hard things, like, and we do, and we so badly, like, we invest these days in our kids and all their sports and all the things that we do. And it's like, but we need to also do other practices. And I think the independence piece, like, sitting here thinking about what more independence I can give, to my boys, because I think that creates confidence that they can do things. And so if we're like, let's just get real practical for a second as parents, and maybe you can break it back down into like the age groups. What are things that we can be doing to help our kids to be more independent?
Yes. So, from an age standpoint, um, independence, like I say, starts at 2. So
Mhm.
prior to that, kids really are just attaching to their caregivers.
Mhm.
So if anyone's listening who has a baby, meet their needs, whatever they are, right? They cry,
Mhm.
you pick them up. I am not a believer in cry it out,
Mhm.
because quite the opposite. I think if you give them the foundation from 0 to 18 months of meeting their needs every time, then they actually will be able to do those things that people say cry it out
Mhm.
allows you to do, which is be independent, be
Mhm.
self-reliant, self-soothe. They're not ready to do that so early on. So age-wise, that's the foundation. Then from, any all the way up till 5, you really want to be working on that independence, autonomy, letting them do things by themselves, letting them stand on a stool in the kitchen and help you cook.
Mhm.
And again, you mentioned it. Us moms need to see that we can do hard things. It's harder for them to be in the kitchen. They're going to make a mess. It's going to take us twice as long to make our
Mhm.
dinner or whatever. But this is really good for them to be learning these skills and to be, again, relying on themselves. If you can cook for yourself, that's a
Mhm.
survival skill,
Sure.
right? And so that's till 5. From 5 to 12, very generally, kids really need to be building their confidence. Um, and you mentioned that, like,
Mhm.
it's like if you're going to be independent, it's it's going to create that confidence in you.
Mhm.
And confidence doesn't come from winning awards or getting good grades or getting accolades or praise. Those are all the bonuses or cherries on top. Where it actually comes from is doing the hard work, working through the frustration, working through it, and coming out the other side and saying, wow, look what I
Mhm.
did.
Hmm.
And so those years are really, it's important for kids to be developing that, because from 12 to 18 is when they're developing their identity. So,
Hmm.
and each stage builds on the one before it, right? So if
Sure.
you had the attachment, then you're ready more for that independence and autonomy, because it's like, oh, I trust my caregiver and now I can kind of move away from them a little.
Mhm.
And then if you have the autonomy, then you have the confidence. If you have the
Mhm.
confidence, then you have this ability to say, this is who I am.
Mhm.
Right. And every kid's going to struggle with that early on.
Yeah.
That's why I don't recommend social media
Mm.
during those years, because it's just hard in general. It's like a baby learning how to walk.
Mm. When should kids get social media?
Well, I'm
Or should they?
I'm from
Mhm.
the camp. Now Jonathan Haidt
Mm.
says 16.
Okay.
So I say 18. Now, between 16 and 18, if you have a mature kid, if you're feeling like they're pretty solid, they're confident, they're
Mhm.
good. I'm not a stickler on that, but
Mhm.
I like to just say 18 because of just the idea that their brains are almost fully developed by then. Your
Mhm.
brain doesn't fully develop till you're 25. And that the last piece of it is the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functioning, decision making, critical thinking. And so by 18, you're getting close to that,
Mhm.
and you can have a better kind of boundary around
Mhm.
it. So as long as possible is really the answer to that.
Yeah. And that's hard because all their friends I have my 12-year-old, all the friends are on Snapchat. He doesn't have it. And I'm like, keep saying no, because I know the kind of kid he is. I know he'll be curious about what everyone's doing. He's got plenty of friends. He doesn't need that.
Mhm.
Um, but it's hard because all the other parents have said yes, and he's the only one that doesn't have it. I'm not knocking other people's decisions. That's just something that I'm trying to preserve with him. Um, like, what do we do then?
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I have the same thing. My 15-year-old is not on social media, and Snapchat is really, I think, the main one that he
Because
would
that's
want
how
to be
kids
on.
communicate, frankly.
Yeah.
Like, they don't really text each other. They're snapping each other,
Yeah.
which is what they do. They
Yeah.
so
Yeah. So, I'll say this. This is where I really kind of get tough and tell
mm,
parents, like, yeah,
mm,
you know,
mm,
yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's hard. I deal with it too. Um,
mm,
and that's where you have to really kind of dig in to yourself and say, yeah, this is making me really uncomfortable. I feel really bad for saying no, but I
mhm,
know this is the right thing to do.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now Jonathan Haidt talks about how we need a community around this. Like we need all parents to say no, right?
Yep.
And that's great. Like God love him for
Ideally,
that.
right? That would be it,
That's
but that's not maybe practical.
that's how I feel. It's like,
Mhm.
uh, that's not going to happen, right? You can't
Right.
control what other people do. And it's like I say, it's the same thing as letting them drive. Like you're teaching
Mhm.
them, well, this is what we do. These are our values. This is
Mhm.
how we operate. And we can control that, but we can't control anyone else. And so you're going to be uncomfortable with
Mhm.
that, but
Mhm.
that's just how it is.
Yes.
And to your point, like your son has a healthy social life, he's developing, very well and doesn't need it.
Mhm.
So and same with my son, he's got a full social life, he has no issues with making friends or connecting with people, and so I don't feel like that's a missing piece for
Peace for
him.
him.
Now, a lot of kids, like a lot of parents or even therapists actually, will say, well, they have trouble socializing and this is a way for them to connect to other kids. And I see that, right? Like that's
Mhm.
a very
It's
logical
a
thing
real
to say.
thing. Yeah.
But again, it's like it's preventing them from working through that. If
Mm.
they have social issues, they really should be getting support and trying to figure out how to deal with that instead of avoiding it and making it easy on them by using
Mhm.
social media.
Mhm. I wanna go back to one thing that you said before because we were talking about independence and you were talking about the different ages. If someone's listening and they're like, "Well, crap. I
Yeah.
haven't done a great job," or, kids had we were dealing with COVID and, things did get easier for them, and we've never sort of remedied that. What can parents do if they're starting today to give their kids some more independence? The summertime, it's like the perfect time, we're recording this in the summer to kinda get kids going because 'cause they're under your roof right now. Like, what can we be doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that parents need to know that they're going to make mistakes. There is no
Mhm.
perfect parent. In fact, there's something in psychology that we call the good enough mother,
Mm. Mhm.
or now we can say good enough parent,
Mhm.
because dads are involved too. And what
Yep.
that means is that we are good enough, right? Because
Mhm.
we're not perfect. And the good enough mother necessarily fails.
Mm.
It's necessary for them to
Mhm.
deal with their disappointment or their upset because of something we did, right? So
Mhm.
so if you are listening and you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, like I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I didn't let my 3-year-old tie their shoes," right?
Mhm.
It's all good because you show up every day, and that's essentially what they need from you.
Yeah.
And so you can pivot if you find that there's something in particular with your kid, that you've heard today that you think, oh, I really need to work on that. You absolutely can. And you do that through your connection with them. So
Mhm.
you can sit down, you can say, like, I really shouldn't have given you a phone when you were 9. Like, that
Mhm.
was a mistake I made and I didn't know any better. And so here's how we're going to kind of try to peel it back. This
Mm.
summer, we're all going to do some screen free time and we're going to connect as
Mhm.
a family. And, I always tell parents, you don't have to give them a Disney day. Like, working
Mm.
parents are busy, right? You can't always like
Mhm.
take them out to the amusement park and have this big day. So connecting with them can be as simple as, hey guys, instead of ordering DoorDash tonight, we're going to cook dinner together.
Mhm.
And we're going to go to the grocery store and we're going to divide up the list. And you're going to go shop for this. And I'm going to go shop for this. And we're going to come home and cook it together and eat it together. And that whole time, nobody's going to be on a device.
Mhm.
And
So
so
it's
that's,
picking those things. Because I
yeah,
wanted to ask you about, like, how do we establish more connection with our kids? I think that's one of the things you've taught, and I think about that with my own boys, like, how do I continue to do a good job with that or a better job? Like, so it's cooking, device-free time, like, what are some other things that we
yeah,
can do?
because parents are busy, it's like
Mhm.
they can do the busy tasks with you, right?
Mm.
If you have to go and mow the lawn or pull the weeds, they can come and do that with you and help you at any age, really. I mean, even
Mhm.
toddlers can have a little job that they do.
Yep.
And so, or running errands together or
Mhm.
whatever. I mean, these are easy ways to stay
Mhm.
connected. The other thing I suggest is having some kind of time where there's just conversation about the day.
Mm.
A lot of parents, including me, I pick up my kids from school. How was your day? Right? That's the
Mhm.
usual. And then you always just get good or fine or
Mhm.
whatever. And then they get talkative later on throughout the
Mhm.
day. And so just carving out that time to
Mhm.
connect and talk and just check in about your day. And parents, I find myself being guilty of this too. Like I often will just make it all about them and not tell them about my day or how I was
Mm.
feeling,
Mhm.
right? And kids today really are self-centered because of that. They don't really care or ask about you. And so parents can really set the stage for that and kind of lead the way. Like, hey, my day, you're not going to tell them everything, obviously,
Right.
because adult problems aren't kid problems, but
Mhm.
you can share parts of your day with
Mhm.
them just so that they can think outside of themselves and not just focus on, their
Themselves.
inner world.
And
Yeah.
to know that, like, the parents, like, "Oh, I had a frustrating day," or "This was really challenging," or "I wish this went different." I think it's sometimes important because we all kind of, at some point saw our parents as people that didn't have any of those things. And it's like you want to, it's a balance, right? But allowing them to see that we're real people too. And, sometimes we're frustrated. And I think that, is, I guess it's a balance, but it's something that I think is important as well to be real, I guess, so that they feel like they can be real with us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can do that. We have a fun way of doing that with our youngest. My husband's in sales, and so he will always say, if he made a sale or he didn't
Mhm.
make a sale, we say it in the form of she loves blueberries. So he'll
Mm.
say, "Well, I made some blueberries today," or
Mm.
"No blueberries today,"
Yeah.
and just very simple, fun. Like,
Yeah.
he
I love
stresses
that.
out about that because
Sure.
sales is hard,
Mhm.
but she doesn't need to know that,
Right,
right?
that's not her worry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanna talk a little bit about vaping and, kind of like drug use because we talked about social media, we talked about teens not driving, but I think this is another issue that is going on, and so why? Why? And because I also believe that I always tell my boys that somebody is trying to buy your attention every day. Like, people are trying to buy your attention on everything that you see, and so I really try to combat that with what I think their attention should be focused on. But, one of these things is, you know, use of drugs. And it's such a dangerous thing now because, and we always tell our boys, like, you can't use drugs. Like, it's so dangerous because there could be something in it. You try it one time. And, but a lot of kids are doing it. So
Mhm.
why?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you're so spot on there about them being sold to.
Mhm.
Kids have always been sold to, right? I
Mhm.
mean, from the
True.
beginning of time,
Yeah.
it's the great marketing ploy is to get kids hooked young so they
It's
have
so
lifetime
true. Yep.
users, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
And they're doing it with tech, they're doing it with vaping, now with marijuana,
Mm.
because they're putting it in the chemicalized form in the pen and it's very addictive. And so I think the issue is that kids are so heavily influenced outside of their families now,
Hmm.
more so than any other generation, right? Because like you and I had what we had commercials, we had
Mhm.
magazines,
It's true.
advertising to us, but that wasn't 24/7, right?
Mhm.
And so now these kids are getting advertised to all the time, more than they're talking to their parents. So
Mhm.
parents are no longer having a major influence over their kids. The culture is.
Wow. So that's another reason why we need to be monitoring all the things that they're listening to or looking at, which leads me to wonder, I think just talking to parents, it's like there's almost this general feeling that like parenting has gotten away from us.
Yes.
Like there's so much outside of our control. There's so many influences in that are coming into our kids with social issues and culture and things that schools are addressing that maybe they didn't before and now that they are. How do we take our power back as
Oh,
parents? I think
I
it's
love
such
that.
an important thing that I think about, like my husband and I talk about. How do we do that?
I love that you brought that up because I so agree. I think that the adults are giving up. right?
Mm.
Like even the schools, they're giving up when the phones
Mhm.
came on the scene. I remember the schools were like, nope, no phones, off and
Mhm.
away, don't even send them to school. And now it's just, oh, the kids have won essentially.
Mhm.
And and same with all of it, with the vaping, with just not allowing them the discomfort by being just so permissive. And
Mhm.
I think we're all burnt out. I think that we have a nervous system issue in our
Mhm.
culture, right? Like
Mhm.
we're all just kind of reacting and we're in fight or flight. And so, how we get our power back is we learn how to calm our systems
Mhm.
so that we can have more of our brain functioning. Because when you're in fight or flight, only one part of your brain is working, and that's the limbic system, and that's designed to help you survive. The other parts of your brain just simply don't work because you don't need them physiologically. So if you calm the nervous system, however you want to do that, right? There's meditation, there's therapy, there's all kinds of ways to do that. But then you can be in those other parts of your brain and you can start to discern that, hey, this can't get away from us. Like we
Mhm.
really do owe it to our kids to protect them from
Mhm.
these things. And um, our culture has really normalized a lot of it, right? Like
Mhm.
I always think about pornography as like an extreme of that. Like
Mhm.
that was so normalized, I think
Mm.
for our generation, right? Because it
Mhm.
was like your dad's Playboy or whatever.
Mhm. And, like,
That
no one
now
said anything about it. It was, like, just, "He's a man, he has one," right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And that was probably pretty innocent
Mm.
compared to certainly compared to what the kids are being exposed to now.
Mhm.
So we have this like sort of high tolerance for
Mm.
these things because we think it's like when we were kids, or like vaping, for example. We think it's like when we were kids, like smoking cigarettes. It's really not the same
It's
thing
not.
because again, it's just more, it's intense, it's like more time that they're spending being exposed to this stuff. And so we do really kind of need to like use the other parts of our brain and acknowledge, hey, this is different. They're being heavily influenced by something outside of us, and we really need to step in and reconnect to them.
Mhm. So it's
So,
really, as a parent, about doing some work on yourself. I mean, that's what I'm hearing you say today, is that if we want to have independent kids, if we want to have connected children, if we want to have kids that are not addicted to their phones, then we got to look in the mirror first and ask ourselves what we need. I mean, like you said, parents are, I think the hard thing today is, like, parents are pulled in so many directions. Both parents often need to work. You know, finances are challenging. Like, there's so many things that people, so it's like by the end of the day, it's like your kids on their phone in their room, and you're like, "Oh my god, I can't stay awake one more second," you know?
mhm.
And so, I think for parents listening, it's like, what can we be doing to make ourselves better, more whole, more calm, so that we can take care of our kids better?
Yeah. So that's the thing, the family essentially
Mhm.
is unhealthy and fractured.
Mm.
So the
Mhm.
parents as the leaders of the family really do need to care better for themselves. So some of those things you can do are those practical things that everybody tells you to do, right? Like
Mhm.
eat right, get some exercise,
Mhm. Take a
sleep,
walk.
take
Mhm.
a walk. Yeah.
Mhm.
And those things are really hard. So when you say like what you're hearing is, yeah, parents need to work on themselves, my messaging is you got to do the hard thing.
Mm.
And, because it's not just you. Like you could put yourself aside as the parent because you're sacrificial and you can, sign up for the travel sport and spend every weekend on your kid and whatever and put yourself aside. That's what parents are trained to do, right? But it's that old cliche of the oxygen mask on the airplane,
Mhm.
right? If you can't breathe, you can't help anybody else. And so
Mhm.
parents really do need to prioritize themselves in that way. And that
Mhm.
requires having boundaries with your kids, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
it requires saying no. I
Mhm.
mean, at one point I said no to my son about a travel sport because of the time in our life and it just was just not going to work.
Mhm.
And so that's okay to do that.
Mhm. It's okay to
Um,
disappoint them. We
that's
don't
right.
always have to, yeah. I
Yeah.
think that that's really good. I wanted to ask you, so you have this tool on your website, so people can go to NicoleRunyon.com, and you have a parenting playbook. You have a lot of great stuff on there. First of all, your website's gorgeous. I just was
Thank
looking
you.
at it the other day. It's wonderful. And you have a download, like a playbook for parents, which I downloaded because I wanted to see what you had to say, and it's all great. But there was one thing on there that I wanted to ask you about before we wrap up, is that you said we've done a great job of building up girls and now boys are falling through the cracks. This understanding allows you to help your sons feel strong and capable. And so I think that this is an issue that I'm noticing. And there was a and I think I'm not sure if you go NYU, I think marketing professor, and his name was Scott Galloway, and he's been talking about sort of men and this younger generation, and he talks about finance and other things. But one of the things he said, which I thought was really good, is he's like, listen, of course we want to like elevate women and we want them to have, I mean, I'm a woman. I want all of those things for women and for myself, but it doesn't mean that we also have to push boys and men down. Like we can have both. Like we can like rising tides.
Yes.
And so I worry about that as a mother. I will be frank. I see it in one of my boys' schools. I think it's an issue. And talk to us about this, what you're noticing, and like what are some things we might be thinking about or doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'm noticing is from very early on, boys tend to not be successful in school because
Hmm.
they don't learn in traditional ways. They
Mm.
learn through physical play,
Yeah.
and schools do not allow for that. And so oftentimes early on they're labeled, they're pathologized, ADD, ADHD. And I think that diagnosis is so heavily overdiagnosed.
Hmm.
I can count on one hand how many actual ADD cases I've seen in the 20 years that I worked with kids.
Mm.
And so when you do that to boys, you tell them essentially you're sending them the message, you're the problem. You can't, function in this environment,
Hmm.
and there's something wrong with you. And so they internalize that shame, and then they become middle school and high school boys who have a fragile ego. So this is where kind of that jerky boy kind of
Hmm.
mentality comes up, right? Where it's like because they weren't really nurtured in the way that they needed to be, then they become kind of grandiose about themselves and develop this big ego so that they can protect themselves from that
Is
wound.
this possibly bullying? Like, could somebody
Yes.
kind of somebody that would personify that could come from that?
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's what happens with boys is then they become aggressive
Mm-hmm.
towards each other, they become aggressive towards girls, and then suddenly they grow up to be men who are considered toxic, right? This toxic masculinity thing that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of pointing the finger at them and saying men are horrible, why
Mm-hmm.
can't we learn to understand what happened to them and what continues to happen to them? Because essentially they're being made to feel like they're not capable of
Mm-hmm.
of being what they need to be. And boy psychology at the foundation of it is they need to feel strong and capable. And because boys today aren't feeling that way, they're depressed, they're unmotivated. Many of them aren't launching as young adults. They're lost, and many of them are suicidal. The numbers of boys that are suicidal is growing.
Wow.
Still hasn't surpassed girls, but it's
Mm.
definitely. I think it's probably going to mess up the numbers, but I think it's increased 22%
Wow.
since COVID.
So what do we do if we're raising boys? How can we, I mean, it sounds to me, one of the things that come to mind is like the importance of that independence so that they're strong and capable.
Mhm.
And, I agree with you. I think culture needs strong, capable men, just like it needs strong, capable women. I mean, that's a whole other podcast that we could do.
Yes, it
But,
is.
um, you know, I there's so much to say there, but like, I guess in short, how do we help our boys to be strong and capable, and how do we encourage that? And because the world might not change, right? How they're seeing them and how how they're treating them, or what opportunities they're giving them. But how can we do that as parents?
Yeah. Well, that's where the dad comes in.
Okay.
And dads, I think, I love dads. They come to
Mm-hmm.
my speaking engagements, they're engaged, they ask questions, they really want to know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they feel that they don't know where their place is.
Hmm.
Because what's happening, I think, is moms, you said it like a little bit ago, like we want to, like, it's in us to nurture our kids and make them comfortable and make them happy. And so a lot of times what's happening is the boys are being sort of overmothered in that
Mm-hmm.
way, and the dads feel like they can't step in and help them to be resilient and strong and kind of have those firm, strong boundaries and the discipline. And so I think dads being able to have that voice is really important. So when I'm coaching a couple, I will often get into that with the moms and the dads if they have a boy. That dads are just in general better at the discipline
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And so
Mm-hmm.
let dad do that, because I think moms tend to not allow that.
Mm-hmm. And it's also maybe the importance of coaches in young men's life who, if they don't have a dad, I mean, like, you think about those booming voices that are telling, that's important for boys to hear. I think that
Yes,
has shaped both of my boys. And I think yeah, I think that you're so right. It's like mothers want to protect their kids, but dads will get after them, and they need that.
absolutely,
They need
yeah,
that.
and you're right. If there's a family where dad isn't around, then yeah, a coach, a teacher. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I love my son goes to an all boys school, high
Mm-hmm.
school,
Mm-hmm.
and it's great
Mm-hmm.
because you have that energy of, like, they know what to do with boys, and they're
Mm-hmm.
tough at this school.
Mm-hmm.
It is very well known for being a disciplinarian school,
Mm-hmm.
high academic expectations,
Mm-hmm.
because again, like, boys need that challenge and that push,
Mm-hmm.
so that they feel that, sense of, okay, I'm in control here.
Mhm,
And that's not toxic, right? So
mhm,
teaching boys that being strong is their strength, so that they can protect and fight if they need to.
mhm,
Not so they can dominate or hurt anyone or put women down, but actually quite the opposite. The motto at my son's school is "Men for others, for the
hmm,
greater glory and honor of God."
hmm. So it's being that servant leader, kind of,
Yes.
right? Strong man so you can protect culture, people,
Yes.
family. Yeah,
Yes.
I love that. So this has been so great, Nicole. Like I think that all the things that you're doing are just so important, and I loved this conversation. These are so many things I've wanted to talk about on the podcast, and so I know you're writing a book,
Yes.
and that is really exciting. Are you sharing the title of it yet?
The title, but not the subtitle. I'm not
Okay,
completely certain about
sure.
that.
Okay.
But the title is "Free to Fly."
Mhm.
So it's essentially this idea that we want to give our kids the independence and freedom to fly, to let them
Mhm.
go into the world and be functional, capable
Mhm.
adults.
I love that. So it's coming out March of 2025? Okay.
Yeah.
So if the best thing for you to do if you're listening is we'll link all of these in the show notes, but you can follow Nicole on LinkedIn and on Instagram. You can go to her website, NicoleRunyon.com, sign up for her emails so that you can be, learn from her, but then also get her book when it comes out, which we'll definitely loop back here on the podcast and tell you about that when it is too, because I think that you're doing such important work. So I'm wondering if I can ask you two questions that I ask all of my guests before I leave here on Becoming Heartstrong. And so the first one is, what is one belief or practice in your life that's helped you get from where you were to where you are today?
That would be the ability to be uncomfortable
Hmm.
and to do hard things.
Hmm.
So, I often wonder of myself these days. I had a thriving, very healthy clinical practice seeing children. And a year and a half ago, I just walked away from it
Wow.
because I realized that parents actually need the help rather than the kids needing the therapy.
Hmm.
And it's been quite challenging.
I'm sure.
I like really challenging. And I often will ask myself, like, why did I do this to myself?
Mhm.
And my answer is twofold. One is on a personal level, it's a challenge. I was comfortable, right? Like
Mhm.
I was doing great, but I was ready for something more. And so it's a personal challenge of like doing something hard and making myself uncomfortable so I grow and learn from it. And
Mhm.
then it's also on of course the altruistic side of really wanting to make a difference, because doing therapy with kids wasn't really making a difference.
Mm.
In some ways, a lot of the kids were getting worse because, again, it's like, oh, it's my fault. I'm the
Mhm.
pathology, right?
Mhm.
When really it's the whole family and
So,
everybody has a
family.
part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. So the final question is, what is one thing that you love about yourself? So this kind of goes to the last question. Because it's been built through adversity. So you could say something like, I love this about Nicole because I've grown into this through disappointment or hardship.
Mhm. I would say my parenting. You
Mm.
know, my kids are 5 years apart. I have two kids, and we always joke that I made all my mistakes on my older one, so I did not my younger one,
Mhm.
and so I'll often apologize to him. I'm sorry, you got all my mistakes,
Mhm.
but you know, I've learned so much from the mistakes I've made, and I've learned so much in my parenting from how I can make up for that, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm not perfect. Even though I'm a child psychotherapist and I know a lot about kids and child development, I'm still didn't know a lot about
Mhm.
parenting. So I am proud of myself for what I've done and how I've talked to my son about the mistakes I've made and apologized to him for it and made the changes necessary so he can grow and be healthy.
That's powerful. Well, thank you, Nicole, for spending time with me today. I loved our conversation and you're doing great work. And I can tell it's very heart centered and mission driven. And I know that you're going to impact so many lives. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Heartstrong. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and applicable to your life. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Before I go, this is just a quick reminder that I believe in you, and I believe that you too have the ability to become heartstrong. I'll chat with you soon.